Tales to dream by. Turn down your lights, draw up your chairs, and listen to the tale of the Frozen Cadavers. It was damp and cold in the cellar of the University Medical Laboratories, but Derek didn't mind. He was used to it. For over 3 years, he'd been taking care of the specimens the students dissected in the classrooms upstairs. These specimens were the bodies of the penniless and unknown dead, the disposal of which is a minor problem in every city. Some find their way to unmarked graves in Potter's Field. Others are assigned to medical schools, silent martyrs to modern science. These specimens were Derek's charges. Early each morning, he opened the enormous refrigerator, put the fresh and partly dissected bodies on little wagons, and wheeled them up to the classrooms so everything would be in readiness when the students arrived. Late each afternoon, he gathered up the grisly remains and put them back into the icy quiet of the refrigerator. All day long, Derek had little to do, for while the students worked, Derek was comparatively idle. He spent his free time seeing that the reserve stock of specimens was kept at the proper temperature. Bodies are valuable at a medical school. They must be attended to by someone who understands their needs. They must be kept neither too warm nor too cold. And Derek was conscientious about his job. He watched his silent charges well and kept a close tab on them. No student ever left the building with anything unless he paid the regular fee. If he wanted a part to dissect during his idle evenings, he went to Derek, and for a set sum secured what he needed. Besides these duties, Derek also received whatever new specimens the college managed to secure. These were signed for by him and duly entered in a book kept for that purpose. It was an easy job, but there were so few who wanted it. The pay was good. It fascinated Derek, and he soon developed a strange sort of affection for his cold and silent companions. They were his friends, his only friends since Susan had deserted him. Susan had been Derek's wife. She had withdrawn their joint savings and left with one of the groundkeepers. That was over a year ago. She had long ago divorced Derek and married David, the groundkeeper. The whole affair had been forgotten by almost everyone, except Derek. It still burned bitterly in his heart, and yesterday he'd heard that Susan and Dave were back in town. All day the old bitterness and disappointment, the heartaches and humiliation of Susan's sneaking deed had flooded his mind. Derek had never said much to anyone about it, but inside he'd been seething with hate and a desire to strike back since the day she left. He would strike back. He'd make them both pay for the canker that had been eating at his heart since then. All day he'd been brooding over it. It was bad enough to desert him and run off with someone else, but to come back to town where he'd see them almost daily, he wouldn't stand for that. He'd have his revenge. He'd make them pay for every sleepless night, for every lonely day. And they wouldn't have to wait long either. He'd start that very night. After work, he called at the house where Susan and Dave were living. Susan was alone when he got there. She smiled at him as he came into the house.
Hello, Derek.
You're looking fine, Susan.
Oh, that's because I'm so happy, I guess.
It's nice you found someone more suited to you than I was.
Derek, can't you forget the past? You're not going to make trouble, are you?
Of course not, Susan. I just dropped by to tell you I intend to let bygones be bygones.
Thank you, Derek. You know, I hate to run away, but I promised Dave I'd meet him downtown.
Oh, let me drive you. My car's just outside.
All right, Derek. Thank you.
In a moment, they were in the car and on their way. Susan was surprised at Derek's cheerful attitude, and so she didn't notice where he was driving her until they were well out of town.
Derek, where are you taking me?
I guess this is far enough. No one can hear you out here.
Well, what are you talking about?
This is as far as you go, Susan. This is the end of the road for you. Say goodbye to your happiness, because it's over. This is a big night for me, Susan, one for which I've been waiting since you left. 1,000 times a day I've flexed my fingers and longed to fasten them around your throat. Now the time for waiting is over. It's here. The minute I've been praying for has come. It's here, Susan. Here. Here. 5 minutes later, Susan was dead, and in half an hour she was lying under a sheet in the silent cold of the big refrigerator. And there she stayed for almost a month. Each day, Derek scanned the papers carefully, expecting every edition to bring him news that David had reported Susan's disappearance to the police. Each morning, Derek carefully uncovered the face that had made them both so happy and so miserable. Derek soon realized he couldn't keep her body forever, so one morning he placed it on one of the little wagons and wheeled it up to a classroom. And so Susan became an anatomical subject. It was now time to get in touch with David, and Derek made his plans. He ran into David one night in a little cafe. David sat alone, and it was obvious he'd been drinking, but he recognized Derek immediately.
Well, if it ain't the Undertaker's friend himself.
How are you, David? How's Susan?
I don't know and I don't care. She left me just like she left you. Skipped out about a month ago.
I thought she was crazy about you.
She acted like she was. Let's not talk about her. I'm glad she's gone. Let's drink to her going.
So you think she ran off with someone else, do you?
I don't care what she did.
Would you like to see her? Would you like to tell her so?
She left town.
No, she didn't. I know where she is, and if you want me to, I'll take you to her.
Okay, but first I'm gonna get roaring drunk.
An hour passed, and David was maudlin when Derek dragged him from the cafe. Then he drove him to the driveway that passed the door where the long baskets with their gruesome contents were delivered. With Derek's help, David found himself in the basement before he realized he was no longer at the cafe.
Where am I?
I told you I'd take you to see Susan.
I don't want to see her.
You'll see her whether you want to or not. The sudden change in Derek's voice shocked David from his stupor.
I'm getting out of here.
No, you're not. You're coming with me. Derek, no longer smiling, roughly grabbed the drunken man and pushed him into the giant refrigerator. When David spoke again, there was a note of fear in his voice.
Hey, where you taking me?
Sit down. I have something to tell you.
Well, hurry up. It's cold in here.
Maybe it'll clear that foggy brain of yours enough so you'll realize what's going on.
I'm getting out.
Oh, no, you're not. You stole Susan away from me.
She wanted to come.
She was my wife, and I loved Susan. Loved her so much I wanted to die when she left me.
Huh? I'm not interested in what you wanted to do.
Maybe you'll be interested to know what I'm going to do to you. It was obvious even to David that insanity was shining from the eyes of the man who stood over him, and the cold chill of fear held David.
What do you want with me?
I want to show you something. Come here. While David watched, Derek drew from the wall what seemed like a big tray of ice cubes. David tried to see what was inside, but couldn't because the contents were covered by a sheet. Slowly, Derek drew this aside as David watched.
It's Susan. What have you done to her?
I didn't do it. It was the students. They practiced surgery on her. They did it.
But you murdered her.
That's right, David. I killed her, and now it's your turn.
No.
You can't get away. There's an empty drawer right next to Susan waiting for you.
Please, Derek, please.
Too late to beg now. You've done your dancing. Now you've got to pay. Derek paused, but fright and horror paralyzed David into silence. After a week or so, I'll put you on a little wagon and wheel you upstairs, and each day sharp knives will probe and cut and slash until there's nothing left of you. And every night I'll wheel you back down here and gloat over what I've done. That's the price you're paying for stealing Susan from me. That's my revenge.
Help!
David screamed only once before he was battered into the eternal silence of death. Next morning, he was listed in Derek's book as John Doe number 3842, automobile casualty, identity unknown, and he went through the usual routine of an anatomical specimen. Soon after, Derek jumped from the window of the building and was found with no identification. He was broken beyond recognition. And so Derek himself was placed in still another drawer to become still another anatomical specimen. And now, the tale of the Golden Cat. I'm going to read to you the diary of a man who is dead, a man who died in a madhouse. Listen. They say I'm a homicidal maniac, that I'm dangerous to society. They say that during one of my violent spells, I killed a woman, murdered her with my bare hands. But this isn't true. I've told my story 1,000 times, but no one believes me. I keep telling it over and over, hoping that someday someone who listens will believe me and get me out of this madhouse. You'll read it, won't you? It won't take long, and I swear that I'm telling the truth. When I graduated from the university after 7 long years of hard work, lack of money prevented me from taking the rest I should have had. I was compelled to go to work immediately for financial reasons. I'd been a brilliant student and a good research chemist, so I had little trouble finding a job. I went to work for a chemical synthetics trust, and they sent me to a small city where one of their factories were located. I had difficulty finding a place to live, but managed finally to locate in 2 comfortable rooms over a store. There was one other apartment in the building, but it was unoccupied. It had been empty for years, and my landlord told me it was not for rent. When I asked him why, he became annoyed. "It's my building, ain't it? If I want to keep that place locked up and empty, that's my business." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right, young man. Now we know where we stand. I'm renting you these rooms for half of what they're worth, and I expect you to keep away from that other apartment." "You have my promise." The place looked drab from the outside, but my rooms were quite spacious and very comfortable. In the rear there was a balcony that ran along the entire building, and I found this a very pleasant place to sit in the evenings. It was cool and quiet, so I spent an hour or 2 out there every night after dinner. One evening I was sitting there, my eyes closed and dozing, when I became aware of something going on behind me. I opened my eyes and looked around. Much to my surprise, I saw a light coming from the windows of the supposedly empty apartment. Someone had evidently moved in, and I had a new neighbor. I wondered what they were like, so I arose from my chair and tiptoed over to the window. I was just about to peek in when the lights were suddenly turned out. So I learned nothing from my spying. I returned to my apartment and undressed for bed. The conduct of my new neighbor struck me, and I couldn't help thinking about it as I lay there in bed waiting for sleep to come. I lay there 2 hours or so, half asleep, listening to the night creakings of the old building. Suddenly, the feeling I was not alone struck me. I listened for sounds, but heard nothing unusual. I could stand it no longer. I jumped from my bed and turned on the lights. I looked around, and there in the middle of my bedroom was an enormous Persian cat.
Meow.
Strangely golden colored, it stood gazing at me with phosphorescent eyes. Her mouth moved again, but this time no sound came from her throat. I called to it. "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty! Here, kitty!"
Meow.
She came over and rubbed against my legs. I stooped over and patted her. She seemed greatly pleased by this attention and jumped up on my bed. I spoke sharply to her. "Get down off that bed!" I started toward her. She backed away, her ears back. Her tail was switching, her eyes glared. "Scat, kitty, scat!"
Meow.
She jumped to the floor again and hid under the furniture. I felt no animosity for the cat, so I decided to let her stay in the room. I climbed back into bed and promptly fell asleep. When I awoke the next morning, my first thoughts were of my new neighbor and the visit of that beautiful golden cat. I arose and found myself looking for the creature. "Kitty, kitty, kitty, kitty! Here, kitty, 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 kitty!" But there was no sign of the cat anywhere. I know you think there's nothing remarkable about my story so far. It all seems so ordinary when I tell it now, but then it struck me as uncanny and strange. It went on this way for almost 2 weeks. The lights in the next apartment always went out when I approached, and the cat appeared and disappeared at will. It was making me nervous. I felt that I must solve this mystery. That night, I stole softly to the balcony. Luck was with me, for the lights were lit. Reaching the window without making a sound, I looked in. At one end of the room, facing me, stood a sofa, and reclining on this was a woman, young and pretty. Her hair fell over her shoulders in a rain of gold. She was looking at herself in a hand mirror, and after passing her forearms over her lips, she stroked her hair with a weird cat-like grace. A board creaked. Instantly she was on the alert. I felt her eyes fixed upon me, strange-looking eyes of green. She stared at me, and against my will, drew me into the room. She smiled.
Oh, it's you.
"I'm sorry I've been spying on you."
Don't apologize. I'm glad you've come. I'm alone so much, it's nice to have someone to talk to.
I was reassured and pleased that she seemed glad I'd come. She invited me to sit down beside her. Little by little, I found my tongue, and we spent a very pleasant evening together. We sat there talking until she suddenly was aware that the clock was striking.
What time is it?
It's striking 12.
Oh, you must go at once. You must be out of here by the last stroke of midnight.
Her alarm was so genuine, I started to leave at once. I don't see why you must chase me away so abruptly.
Don't ask questions, but go. Go quickly.
It took only a few seconds for me to return to my apartment. I sat by the window in the darkness. The last stroke of the bell barely faded into silence when I felt the now familiar and gentle stroking of the golden cat against my legs. By this time, I'd become very fond of her, so I picked her up and took her in my arms. She settled herself in my lap, utterly contented. After that, I spent every evening in the apartment next door, but every evening I had to leave before midnight, and every evening when I came home, the golden cat was waiting for me. One night as I was sitting in my room before going to bed, an idea came to me, an idea that grew and grew until it became an obsession. I had come to believe that my lovely neighbor and the golden cat were one and the same. They both had the same eyes and the same color hair. I decided to mention the cat the next time I saw the girl next door. Have you noticed the golden cat, the one that's been around my apartment?
You must mean Linda. She's my cat.
Your cat? Strange, I never see her here.
I'm afraid when you see me, you'll never see Linda.
She spends her nights in my place. In fact, she's there most of the time.
Yes, Linda likes men better than she does women.
Soon a vague sort of terror began haunting me. I felt that sanity was slipping from me. The belief that the cat and woman were one grew and grew. I fell in love with the woman deeper and deeper, and I began to fear the cat, the poor, harmless golden cat. I spent long nights in sleepless torment, such as maniacs must suffer. If I could only see the two together, all my fears would vanish. But this was not to be. For try as I would, I found it impossible to get the two in the same room at the same time. I began to be mentally disturbed. My mind was going. I must do something to retain my balance. I must convince myself that this was just a delusion. There was only one way. I must get rid of that cat. All day long, one idea came rushing through my mind. Tonight, after midnight, when she comes into my room, I'll do away with her. That evening, the woman was more beautiful, more charming than she had ever been. I told her how much I loved her, and she told me of her love for me. I kissed her. I held her in my arms. I was happy, happier than I'd ever been before. When midnight approached, I begged not to go, but she made me leave. Back in my room, the golden cat soon appeared. She seemed even more affectionate than usual. I picked her up. I held her very carefully. Then slowly, I tightened my grip. I was determined to crush her, to strangle her, to be rid of her forever. She sensed this at once. She fought and scratched. But I felt nothing. I knew nothing. Nothing but the desire to kill her. Tighter and tighter, I squeezed her throat. Only once I looked at her. There was no fear or loathing in her eyes, only reproach, deep, deep reproach. And then she died. I laid her on the floor, and as I did so, there was a knock, and I answered it. What's going on here? Sounds like someone being murdered. I've just killed my cat, a beautiful golden cat. It didn't sound like no cat to me. What's that over there on the floor? That's Linda, the cat. It don't look like no cat neither. It looks more like a woman. I whirled around and looked. There on the floor lay the woman, her eyes closed, her golden hair streaming down her back. The woman was dead. I've told you everything just as it happened. You believe me, don't you? You'll get me out of this madhouse. You won't let them keep me here any longer, will you? I'm not mad. I'm sane. I didn't kill her. I loved her. It was a cat I killed. A beautiful golden cat. Remember, there are no spirits, no black magic, nothing to be afraid of, really. But just the same, lock your doors, pull down your shades, cover up. You never can tell what might happen. Good night, Mayor. Tales to dream by. Turn down your lights, draw up your chairs, and listen to the tale of The Doctor and the Killer.
It ain't right. It ain't fair to keep me alive just so they can hang me next week. You won't cheat the law by committing suicide if I can help it.
This scene was heard in a prison hospital. The two actors were Dr. Parker, the prison physician, and Killer Clark, a condemned prisoner. Somehow, Clark had gotten a razor blade and slashed his wrists, but his attempt on his own life had failed because of the skill Dr. Parker had used in saving his life. Clark would now spend the rest of his short time on this earth in the prison hospital. Here he'd be watched day and night. The killer knew this as he lay in his bed, silent and sullen, waiting for the time for his execution. During his last week of life, no one came to see him except an Oriental little man who talked quietly to the prisoner, and the killer hung on every word. He listened wide-eyed with astonishment while his visitor read from an ancient leather-bound book. And when the little man left, Clark begged him to return, but he never did. However, when the morning of his execution arrived, Clark seemed almost eager to go. He acted as if he were starting on a new adventure and not like a man about to be hanged. He was still weak from his wounds and had to be helped into the execution chamber. He looked around at his witnesses, and his eyes fell on Dr. Parker.
Hello, Sawbones. Ain't so anxious to save my life this morning, are you?
The circumstances are different.
Gonna cut me open after I'm dead?
I'm paid by the state to perform an autopsy on your body. It's the law.
The law. I'm gonna beat that law.
I'm afraid not, Clark. You'll be dead in half an hour.
Listen, Sawbones. In an hour from now, my body'll be on ice in the morgue. I know that. But I'm coming back, Doc. I'm coming back to get you.
I don't believe in ghosts, Clark, so your threats don't frighten me. Just then the hangman and his assistant approached the prisoner. It took but a few seconds to strap his arms to his sides, place a cap over his head, and adjust the noose. Since Clark had refused to minister, the warden asked the usual question. Have you anything to say, killer, before the law exacts its penalty?
Yeah. I want to tell the Sawbones to look out for me. I'm coming back for him, and when I do, I'll kill him.
The hangman pulled the lever, and Killer Clark fell from sight. Dr. Parker and the hangman walked to the edge of the trapdoor and watched. Silently, the witnesses left, and the doctor and the warden then went to the little room below. 10 minutes later, the doctor turned to the warden and said, I pronounce this man dead. After the customary autopsy had been performed, Dr. Parker turned Clark's body over to the morgue and went home. As the doctor entered his living room, an Oriental little man stood up and addressed the doctor.
You're Dr. Parker, aren't you?
Yes. Can I do anything for you?
I think we can be of great service to each other.
Really? How?
I've made a truly remarkable discovery, but I need someone like you, Doctor, to help me.
What sort of a discovery have you made?
I can bring back the dead to life.
Ridiculous.
I expected you to say that, Dr. Parker, and I'm prepared to prove my claims.
Well, what do you want from me?
You have a human body on which to experiment?
Why not an animal?
Because I've gone beyond animals. I do not need your help to experiment with them. I want to try my method on human being, a human who's been dead for at least 12 hours.
Impossible. No man can revivify a body that's been dead for 12 hours.
I can. Have one in your operating room tonight, and I'll show you. I'll show you something you'll never dream possible. Good day, Dr. Parker. I shall see you tonight at 10.
The nameless little man bowed and left. So far, this had been a trying day for the doctor, so he left orders that he was not to be disturbed. He went to his study and lay down upon the couch. Barely had he closed his eyes when the phone rang. Hello? This is Dr. Parker. What? Okay, I'll be right over. The phone call sent the doctor hurrying back to the prison. There in the infirmary, an old man lay dying, a man who had spent so many years locked up that his mind had become slightly affected. The old man seemed frightened and spoke fearfully.
Doctor, I'm glad you've come.
What's the trouble?
I always thought I'd be glad when the time come for me to die, but now I'm afraid.
There's nothing to be afraid of. It's like going to sleep.
Oh, but it ain't, Doctor. It ain't. I feel like something's happening inside of me, like something bad, awful bad, was trying to get in there and push me out of my own body, like there was a struggle going on inside of me.
When did you first notice this feeling?
I noticed it this morning when they hung Killer Clark. I had sort of a fit, and I've been getting worse ever since.
I'll give you something that'll quiet you. Dr. Parker administered a sedative, and in a short time the old man was mumbling sleepily. It was quite plain to see that the end was close, so Dr. Parker sat down beside him. An hour went by. The old man roused from his stupor, sat up in his bed, and looked wildly about.
I don't know what it is, but it's gaining. It's gaining. It's got me.
Before the physician could do anything, the old man dropped back dead. The doctor wrote out the death certificate and had the body removed. As he left the prison, he was accosted by the same little man who had been to see him earlier in the day.
Hello, Dr. Parker. I hear an old man just die.
Supposing someone did just die, what of it?
We might try my experiment on him tonight. We might bring him back to life if you'd have him taken to your surgery. Good day, Doctor. I'll see you tonight at 10.
The more Dr. Parker thought of it, the more fascinated he was by the suggestion. And just to see what would happen, he had the old man's body carried to his operating room. But promptly at 10, his visitor arrived.
I see you followed my suggestion, Dr. Parker.
Yes, I did, but I'm not quite sure that I should have.
You'll not regret it, for you'll be privileged to witness an unbelievable event.
You say you performed this experiment on animals?
Many times, Doctor, but there's a difference between animals and humans, a difference you doctors do not recognize. You see, humans have souls. Animals merely have life force. In bringing an animal back to life, there's never any change. But with human, you draw a soul back into a body. It's quite possible that a stronger soul than that which originally inhabited the body might take possession.
By this time, the doctor was feeling sorry that he had listened to such drivel, but it was too late now. He determined to see it through. You mean, if you should bring this man back to life, his body may be inhabited by a soul other than his own?
Exactly.
Ridiculous.
You shall see. You shall see. Come, let's go to work.
The doctor was fascinated by the little man's actions. First, he forced some strange liquid down the dead man's throat. Then, placing his hand on the corpse's forehead, he uttered an incantation, weird and awesome, and then a change came over the body. Soon the waxen pallor of death changed to the flush of life. Dr. Parker stared. Then he whispered, He's coming to.
Yes, Dr. Parker. Look.
The old man's eyes opened. He moistened his lips. Slowly and laboriously, he sat up, then got off the table. Behind the glass doors of the sterile cabinet, his eyes fell upon the doctor's instruments. He smiled, opened the doors, picked up a long razor-like scalpel, and spoke.
Well, Sawbones, I said I'd come back and get you. Now I'm here.
This wasn't the voice of the old man. This was Killer Clark speaking. Slowly he walked toward Dr. Parker, the lust to kill in his eyes. The doctor started for the door, but the little man was there ahead of him.
Oh, no, you don't, Doctor. I promised him his revenge. I mean to see that he gets it.
The doctor cried out, Help! Help! Then the killer struck. Again and again he struck until he was sure that the doctor was really dead. The little man chuckled.
I'm sorry I couldn't get you a younger body, Killer, but that will come later. Come, let's get out of here. We have work to do, much work.
2 weeks later, an old man with a lust to kill and a slightly younger Oriental-looking companion were machine-gunned by the police while trying to murder a diamond salesman. And this was the real end of Killer Clark and his unknown companion.
And now, the tale of the spiders.
Stuart Dolman was back in Dolmanville. For 20 years, he'd been hidden away in the jungles of South America, and strange stories had come to the little town about his activities. Some said he was the great white priest of a tribe on the Amazon. Curious neighbors had watched him go through a savage ritual and heard him speak strange words. Even his hired hand told a most unusual story one night in the village store.
I seen him, I tell you. He stood in the room making funny sounds, talking some heathen language. Then spiders come scurrying toward him from all parts of the room. Yes, sir, spiders. Big ones, little ones, black ones, and brown ones. They crawled up his legs. He picked up some in his hands. He talked to 'em and petted 'em. Then he said some more words, and the spiders left, went back to where they come from. I seen it with my own eyes.
While few of the villagers believed Eben's story, the gossip reached the ears of Stuart Dolman's brother Bruce, who went to call on his long-missing relative.
What's this I hear about you charming spiders?
Quite a trick if you can do it.
Stuart, have you forgotten the position we Dolmans hold in this town? All this strange talk about you has got to stop.
Well, as soon as I collect my share of Father's will, I'll go back to South America, and you'll never see me again.
It'll be at least a month before the estate is settled. In the meantime, why not come and live at my house? I'll be glad to have you. Besides, it'll put an end to all this silly gossip.
Well, Bruce, that's mighty nice of you. I'll move up to the old mansion this very day.
While this gossip was of small consequence to Bruce, there was another matter more important. It concerned the inheritance their father had left the boys. Stuart couldn't be put off forever. He must be paid his share sometime. Now, Bruce loved money, loved it more than anything else, and he was determined that his brother would never return to South America with his share of the fortune. He'd get rid of Stuart, slowly and deliberately, and keep the money all for himself. He worked out his plan. Each day he managed to place a tiny dose of poison into Stuart's food. Gradually, Stuart lost strength, until he became so bad he was forced to go to bed and remain there. One evening, while Bruce was sitting at his brother's bedside, the sick man asked him,
Bruce, ever since the first day I came to live with you, you've been poisoning me, haven't you?
Yes, Stuart, I have. There was a long pause. The room was silent. Bruce smiled at the dying man. In a few minutes now, it'll all be over, and you'll be dead.
And Father's fortune will all be yours.
Exactly. You should have stayed in South America with your savages and your spiders.
You'll not live to enjoy your money.
I think I will, for no one suspects I've been slowly murdering you.
Why couldn't you kill me quickly? Why have you made me suffer this way?
To kill you quickly might have aroused suspicion. I had to protect myself, and I've done it well. I've covered every trace. The dying man closed his eyes. His brother sat staring into his face, hoping this was the end, staring like a god of avarice and evil. Again, Stuart slowly opened his eyes. He spoke, and his words sounded like a prayer.
Sedna, Eustrel, mother of all spiders, help me to die. Help me to be avenged.
You can't frighten me, Stuart. You'll die. You'll be buried. The money'll be mine, and that'll be the end of it. Stuart's face relaxed. The pain left. Stuart Dolman was no more. Bruce listened for a heartbeat, then drew a sheet over his brother's face and left the room. He failed to notice a tiny black spider come from under the bed and scurry out of the room. Bruce Dolman had murdered his brother, and no one suspected him. On the evening of the funeral, Bruce sat in his study adding up the profits of his act when Eben the gardener appeared. Well, Eben, what do you want?
There's something I got to talk to you about, Mr. Dolman.
All right, out with it. What is it?
It's spiders, Mr. Dolman. The garden's full of 'em.
You can buy some spray and get rid of 'em, can't you?
That's just it. I've been spraying 'em all afternoon, but it don't do no good. For every one I kill, a dozen new ones seem to spring up.
Where do they come from?
I don't know. I never seen nothing like it in my whole life. The shrubs is just full of 'em. The trees are a mass of 'em. There's millions of 'em in the tool house. No matter where I turn, there's spider webs. No matter what I touch, there's spiders. And they don't run from me. They just seem to stand and stare at me.
Eben, I think you're going crazy.
No, Mr. Dolman, I ain't crazy. I told you the truth. I'm telling you this, if it gets any worse, I will go crazy. I just know I will.
Weary and baffled, Eben left. Annoyed, Bruce Dolman went back to his last column of figures and was about to close his book when a tiny spider crawled to the center of the page and stopped. Seemed like a warning of what was to come, a reminder of the crime he, Bruce Dolman, had committed. Angrily, he slammed the book shut, crushing the spider, and went to bed. Next morning after breakfast, Bruce went to the garden to see if what Eben had told him was the truth. He found him working at a flower bed. Well, where are all the spiders you told me about?
They're gone, Mr. Dolman. I can't find a single one of 'em.
I don't believe there ever were any spiders.
Yes, there was, Mr. Dolman. Look in the shrubs and trees. You can see the webs they spun. Thousands of webs, but Not a single spider can I find. Strangest thing I ever heard of. I can't understand it. Just can't understand it.
Bruce couldn't either. All day he stared at the empty webs, wondering what had become of the insects. That night, Bruce Dolman sat in his study. Bruce Dolman was afraid, for with the setting of the sun, the spiders had returned to their webs. The garden was full of them. The trees were covered with them. It was impossible to walk a foot without brushing against them. It was impossible to walk outdoors without soft, clammy spiderwebs wrapping themselves about his face. Perhaps they'd go away with the daylight. If they didn't, he'd get rid of them. He'd hire every man in the village to tear down their webs and clean them out. He rose from his chair, crossed the room, and opened the door.
Go away! Go away!
Across the doorway was an enormous web, and right in the center sat a spider, a huge spider, brown and hairy. He sat there with blood-red eyes, staring unblinkingly at Bruce Dolman, eyes that were filled with the lust to kill, eyes filled with hate, eyes cruel and pitiless. Bruce stepped back from the door, picked up a book, and threw it at the creature. The spider leaped at the man and missed him by inches. That leap seemed like a signal to innumerable other spiders. Millions of them came crowding through the doorway, sleek black ones, dull brown ones, striped and banded ones, smooth ones, fuzzy ones, and on they came toward Bruce, slowly and steadily. Back to the corner of the room he went.
Go away! Go away! I'll kill you! Every one of you!
Panic overcame the man.
I'll kill you! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!
He kicked at the nearest insects. 4 of them jumped and struck their mark. They bit and clung, then a dozen, then 100, then 1,000. Blinded with fear and pain, Bruce struck at them, fought them, kicked them, crushed them, but on they came, on and on. He stumbled and fell. Spiders swarmed over the prostrate man and covered him completely, a seething mass that writhed and struggled, that bit and stung. Soon, the man lay still. But for many hours after life had left his body, the crawling mass of spiders took their fill. They had tasted blood. When daylight slowly sifted into the room early the next morning, there was little left of Bruce Dolman. No one could understand what had killed him, for not a single spider was found in the room. And to this day, the people of Dolmanville are still wondering what had happened to Bruce Dolman.
Remember, there are no spirits, no black magic, nothing to be afraid of, really. But just the same, lock your doors, pull down your shades, cover up. You never can tell what might happen. Good night, Mayor.